St. Cyril's Christology and the Chalcedonian Christological Controversy by Darren Faber. Introduction. In an attempt to rehabilitate Nestorius, modern historians such as Williston Walker have resorted to impugning the character and motivations of St. Cyril of Alexandria. Walker goes so far as to accuse St. Cyril of unscrupulous ambition combined with jealousy, and further insinuates that Cyril's Christology is most aligned with the heresy of Apollinarism, in which aspects of the divine nature absorb humanity. Rather than attending to the actual theological positions of the persons involved, such historians prioritize the importance of the polemics of politics over piety and principled theological positions. They make the strong personalities of various figures a footnote in history, of primary concern, and thus lose sight of the vital core of what makes Orthodox Christianity such a life-giving force in the world. They are unwilling or unable to follow the thread of consistent theological experience and witness that unite the mind of the Orthodox Church throughout time and space, from council to council. Instead, lacking the theological sensibilities necessary to rightly discern the word of truth, they sully the reputations of holy hierarchs and trust more in their own understanding of history than the witness of the Church. Contrary to these slanderous revisions, St. Cyril elaborates upon an illustrious tradition that defends the beating heart of our faith from those Christological distortions which lead to sterility in the spiritual life and fragmentation of the faithful. He is rightly remembered by the Church as a dogged defender of the vitality of our vision of life in Christ, and no amount of revisionist history can revise that. It is true that he is seen as the champion of both Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian Christianity by the respective factions. However, a careful reading of his mature theology, combined with an analysis of his dialogue with John of Antioch via Paul of Emesa, provides ample evidence that Cyril himself already had done the work of reconciling the kenotic Christology articulated in his On the Unity of Christ to the language of the two natures united in one person of John of Antioch. St. Cyril celebrated the peace achieved between Antioch and Alexandria in 433. Consequently, the Council of Chalcedon's pronouncement of Christ's hypostatic union of two natures in 451 was merely a ratification of the peace achieved 18 years prior. Although many years of separation stand between the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian churches, St. Cyril and his writings are the best hope we have of seeing the two churches reunited. On the Unity of Christ. St. Cyril of Alexandria holds a place of honor alongside illustrious saints such as Athanasius the Great and Gregory Nazianzus, in insisting upon the therapeutic nature of the theanthropic vision of the saints, in which God became man so that man might become God, and that which he has not assumed he has not healed, but that which is united to his Godhead is also saved. Like St. Gregory, Cyril carries with him the experience of Christ's presence as the fire which does not consume, but transfigures what it touches, without destroying its nature or undergoing change itself. Though he doesn't consistently use the language of two natures, it is he who speaks of the fences of Chalcedon when describing the union of the Godhead and manhood, in which the Word who is God introduces the life-giving power and energy of his own self into his very own flesh, united there unconfusedly and unchangeably and in a manner he alone knows. This is accomplished impassively by means of the divine self-emptying, or kenosis, described by the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Philippians. It is by this self-emptying that God assumed everything that went along with humanity, ennobling the nature of man in himself by making it participate in his own sacred and divine honors. In St. Cyril's Christology, the humility of God's extreme condescension meets the humility of humanity's perfect submission. This can be contrasted with Nestorius' Christology, in which the dignity of God prevents him from condescending all the way to us, and thus aspects of our humanity must be raised up by our own efforts. Here already, in a text universally lauded as orthodox by Chalcedonians and non-Chalcedonians alike, we have everything required to articulate the unconfused and unseparated unity of two natures in one person and hypostatic union in Christ. No change in the substance of Cyril's theology is necessary to bridge the gap between himself and the statement of faith delivered to him via Paul of Emesa from John of Antioch. The official pronouncement of reunion between Antioch and Alexandria by St. Cyril after the delivery of John of Antioch's letter in the hands of Paul, interpreted by those who would come to be known as Monophysites in the subsequent years as merely a capitulation to the demands of Nestorius, was clearly not seen as such by Cyril himself. The reasons for this are not superficial. It is clear that when he was convinced that the central issue of God's salvific assumption of humanity in Christ was safe, he was quite prepared to go the extra mile to meet the Syrian theologians' points. It likely was the diligent and humble work of Paul of Emesa, working patiently alongside Cyril, through the nuances and terminology that lay between Antioch and Alexandria, that helped to bridge the gap between Cyril's kenotic Christology and the two natures Christology of Antioch. The letter from John of Antioch, delivered by Paul, articulates the Chalcedonian Christological formula of two natures in one person, which St. Cyril approved of. Let the heavens rejoice, and let the earth be glad, for the dividing wall of partition has been taken away, and grief has been silenced, and all kinds of difference of opinion has been removed, are not the words of an arrogant and unreasonable jealous power-monger. Rather, they are the words of a spiritually sensitive hierarch, intent upon vouchsafing the transmission of the saving presence of God from one generation to the next. He did not wish to perpetuate division where none was discerned. It is not out of pride that he defended the faith, but out of a desire to ensure that all the faithful had access to a true understanding and experience of God's desire to be all in all through Christ. Likewise, each of the 12 anathemas against Nestorius, defending Mary as the Mother of God, the natural hypostatic union of God and man in Christ, and the natural union of all aspects of who we are, even our suffering, with divinity, serve to frame by exclusion all potential Christological pitfalls that would undermine the concrete subjective unity of Christ as both God and man. These anathemas were ratified during the Fifth Ecumenical Council, thereby requiring the Chalcedonian definition of faith to be interpreted in a Cyrillian fashion. Chalcedon. As stated previously, it didn't take much to interpret the Chalcedonian definition in a Cyrillian fashion, given that it was Cyril himself who spoke of the union of the divine and human as being accomplished without confusion, change, or alteration, and it was he who gave his stamp of approval to the unity of the divine and human natures in one person in his response to John of Antioch. It is, in fact, from a combination of Cyril's own writings and from his correspondence with John of Antioch that the language of Chalcedonian definition is derived. However, since Cyril had been 7 years reposed at the time of the Fourth Council and was not present to give his stamp of approval directly at Chalcedon, many of his followers thought it a betrayal, rather than a ratification of the reconciliation of Antioch and Alexandria achieved in 433. Responsibility for the resulting schism cannot be laid at St. Cyril's feet. He did what he could to mend the division within his lifetime, and the Fourth Council honored him by adopting his language in the Declaration of Chalcedon. Justinian and the Fifth Ecumenical Council bestowed even greater upon St. Cyril, ratifying his 12 anathemas. Everything was done to hold Cyril in as high a regard as possible, respecting the language of his Christology, while also respecting, as he did, the language of two natures in one hypostasis. I see little more than that the Chalcedonian Church could have done at that juncture, theologically speaking. However, I can also understand why some of the followers of St. Cyril might have been unsatisfied with the language of Chalcedon. Through the language of the kenotic self-emptying of the Godhead, Cyril articulates an understanding of the impassible union of Godhead and manhood without change, confusion, or alteration in an apophatic way that deftly addresses the criticisms of his detractors. I can imagine that the formulaic nature of the Chalcedonian definition, though technically correct, might lack some of the beauty of Cyril's kenotic Christology. It might have felt like an acquiescence to a less profound and nuanced understanding of Christ. Any hope of reunion between the churches hinges upon a close reading of Cyril's writings to discern how the Cyrillian Oriental Orthodox position is compatible with that of Chalcedon, as affirmed by Cyril himself. Fortunately, many steps in this direction have already been taken. Faithful non-Chalcedonians. Because the eternal pattern of God's providence, not politics, is what generates history, there are elements of this schism that must not be assumed to be insurmountable. Because of the variations in the language of St. Cyril and the high regard that both Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian Christians hold him in, Cyril remains the Church's best hope of a healing of the divide that separates the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian churches. On multiple occasions throughout the 20th century, representatives from both the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian Orthodox churches have entered into dialogue with one another to clarify what exactly happened at Chalcedon, and whether anything could be done to heal the rifts formed during that tumultuous time in church history. Specifically, during the dialogues of 1989 and 1990, the Oriental and Eastern representatives agreed on a joint statement of faith that mirrored in every way the Declaration of Chalcedon. It was clarified that the non-Chalcedonian Church uses the term miaphysis with a different meaning than that of Chalcedonian Christianity. For them, the term physis refers to concrete substance, not nature. As a result, it is more akin to the term hypostasis. There was likewise a joint condemnation of the Eutychian heresy, Nestorianism and Crypto-Nestorianism, Monergism, Monothelitism, and Iconoclasm. The Eastern Orthodox delegates assented to the full orthodoxy of St. Cyril's formulation of Christology, when understood properly, one physis, nature, of the incarnate Logos. The Oriental delegates likewise affirmed Cyril's acceptance as fully orthodox of John of Antioch's alternative Christological formulation. The four offenses of Chalcedon, which find their roots in the writings of Cyril, were likewise affirmed. In other words, according to this meeting of representatives, all that remains between the churches is political history. Anathemas must be lifted, love must be fostered, mutual understanding through sharing life together and prolonged exposure to one another's faith and practice must be prioritized. It is through genuinely consequential political events and lamentable yet understandable historical misunderstandings and misconstruals that the rift has been suffered to remain so long. It is only through genuine charity and understanding and deep reflection upon the reality of Christ's presence in and among us that communion might be restored. If we believe that the objective perspective of God has the final word, not schism or corruption, then we must believe that all that is non-essential that stands between the churches can and will be overcome by Christ. Let us hope for it, let us strive for it, that the beloved St. Cyril might be honored for the faithful servant and lover of peace that he was and is. Let us look forward in hope to the day when we might say together with Cyril and all the saints, "Let the heavens rejoice and the earth be glad, for the dividing wall of partition has been taken away, and grief has been silenced, and all kind of difference of opinion has been removed."